Hello everybody, happy Friday 13th to you. It is Friday the 13th of May. And still working on Eisenhorn. I've gotten some work done on him. You can see again the other day I did the green and then I did the interior in cream. I kind of thought about doing some freehand on the interior or the exterior, but the surface is so rough even though it's metal. There's still lots of little dips and dives and gewgaws that whatever I did I would mess up. And so instead I'm going to just work on getting this all painted. I went back and redid some of the, initially I'd had this part here that's white, green, but then when I put it together it would have been, the colors didn't progress, they didn't layer well. And so I went back and changed that part to the off-white that the interior of the jacket is. Let's get this brush a little more loose. There we go. But still enjoying the May Painting Challenge videos that are coming up. Lots of good content coming out. I haven't been able to watch as much as I wanted. Again, for the exact same reason that I haven't been able to paint every day these past couple weeks, and that's because I have children who are quite demanding and just time consuming, and that's just the nature of children. So can't really complain about that. It was my own fault. I was the one who lobbied for children and then lobbied for the second one so soon after the first. But no regrets. Kids are awesome. But things have been going pretty well here at the household. The iron price, as the war boss called it, that I paid for my tree chopping down is nearly healed. Finger is growing back. It's actually at the gross peeling off scab stage, which is why I have the band-aid on here, because you guys really don't need to see the gross peeling off scab stage. You may be able to tell from an increased bass range in my voice, the pollen is still thick here in North Carolina. But it'll eventually go away, and then it'll be replaced by heat and humidity. I have finally decided which model I'm going to do for the May Painting Challenge. I will get to that here in a little bit, once I get to a stopping point here on the paint. But let's see, let's get this a little bit, and then I'll pull the model out here. It's one that I bought off eBay a few years ago, or maybe 1 year ago, when I was, okay, I can't say was, as in the past tense, when I was more susceptible to impulse buying. And part of me is glad I bought this, because it was like about $10 or $15 less than the ticket price. But if you listen carefully, you may be able to hear the dog barking in the background. But I'll show you the model, and then the Jank Master asked for some more Roman history, and so I'll talk to you about the siege of Syracuse a little bit. It's something that I have a little bit of knowledge on, only the basest level of knowledge. Still have a lot to learn. The amazing thing about ancient history is that we don't, relative to, say, the medieval era, we don't really have a lot of documentation. I mean, we call the medieval and the Carolingian era the Dark Ages because, you know, it's like, you know, technology backslid, we don't have as many writings. And for the early post-Roman fall, there is actually a lot of emptiness, like not a lot of writing. But there is some. But after Charlemagne reinstituted education and learning, in his kingdom and forced the nobility to send children to school, basically. There came eventually there came a proliferation of writings to the point where there are a lot of medieval manuscripts that have gone untranslated or unresearched or unpublished, especially the 12 and the 1300 time, right before the Black Plague, where there was a little mini Renaissance that was snuffed out by the removal of 25% of the European population through bacterial plague. But if you learned ancient Greek and Latin and set to it about your college years, you could, in theory, read every primary source that we have in their own language before you died for the ancient world. Whereas with the medieval times, there are so many books that, like I said, just haven't been translated or researched or looked at or considered, that you would not have enough time in a lifetime to read all of them. So that, I find that interesting. But I digress, as I always do. Let's see. This is the part where I always have to go back and touch up the undercoat. But that time I didn't do so bad. Well done me. I'll get a cookie later. But the model that I have decided upon is one from Warhammer Warhammer Fantasy. Partially, last year I did Nagash and I did King Leon Leoncoeur, the original one, the original metal model, which is totally 90s stylized. But this year, kind of in celebration of the Total War Warhammer Fantasy that's coming out, I shall be building Karl Franz on Deathclaw. And I will be working at using the airbrush on him, especially for his hindquarters, because that's tigerish. And what I plan on doing is using some masking tape I'll prime it black, use masking tape to mark off all the tiger stripes that I'll be getting onto him, and that way I can get a more tigerish background. Now, I'm not going to paint him as Karl Franz. I think I'm going to paint him as my own fluffy Elector Count. It's always been a goal of mine, even before they announced that they were offing the Fantasy Battle and going for the Age of Sigmar, to build a kind of a sleeper joke army based on a Southern Elector Count or an SEC, and then paint all the different units, the different colors of the Southeastern Conference college football teams, and have them fluffily bend into that. Like the Karl Franz will be the Southern Elector Count on Albie, the War Teagle, that is the Tiger Eagle, which is making fun of the Auburn in some ways. But that's a story. I'll tell that when I do that. But even though I've already made it up to 9 minutes, I'm going to tell you about the Siege of Syracuse. So sorry, Jank, it took a little bit longer than expected. But as promised, I will do so. But back in the Second Punic War, around the year 214 BC, Syracuse's old king died. It was actually a little bit before 214 that he died. But anyway, he dies, and his grandson inherits the throne. And falling under the sway of several anti-Roman factions, they began to make a ruckus and impede Rome and not behave, whereas they had been a very staunch Roman ally, especially in the wars. The first war with Carthage back in 260s BC, 268, I think 264 BC. The big first war with Carthage that eventually led to the second war with Carthage. But anyway, they start misbehaving, sending naughty letters to Rome, saying that in fact, their mother wears army boots, which probably was true because it's Roman, but is their insults nonetheless. And the Romans send down an army, and they invest Syracuse in siege. And in part because Syracuse is an old city, it was actually involved in the Peloponnesian Wars in 400s BC, 415, 420 BC, somewhere around in there. The big war between Athens and Sparta, that is forced upon high school students throughout the years. But also in part because, because the city was old, it had all these fortifications that had slowly been built up over literally centuries. And there also happened to live in the city the great mathematician and intellectual Archimedes. Now, Archimedes, his most famous story is the Eureka story, where the king of Syracuse had a crown commissioned and made out of gold that he had given to a goldsmith. He said, "Hey, I want you to make this into a crown for me." And the crown comes back, and it just doesn't feel right. He's like, this doesn't feel. I think I've lost some of the gold that I've handed off to this goldsmith. But he doesn't know how to figure it out other than melting the crown all the way down. And he liked the crown. And comparing it, one block of the ingot that he would get from the crown versus the ingot of gold he had given to the goldsmith. And he asked Archimedes, as his brilliant mathematician, he's like, "I want to find a way how to do this without ruining the crown." And Archimedes is puzzling about it. He's thinking about it, and he just thinks and thinks and thinks. And finally, one day, as he's puzzling on the problem, he gets into the bathtub, and the water goes up in the tub and kind of overflows the bathtub. And he realizes the principles of buoyancy then, of water displacement. That no matter how the crown was shaped, it would still displace the same amount of water as gold versus the amount of water as silver, because silver is not as heavy as gold. It would take up more volume. And so he's like, "Oh, Eureka, I found it." And he gets out of the tub and he runs naked through the streets of Syracuse to the king's council chambers. All the way from his house to the king's house, naked. And he says, "Your Majesty, I have figured it out." And he explains how he's figured it out. And the king is like, "Well, that's really great. Why don't you go put some pants on?" And so Archimedes, that's kind of his intellectual level. He's so smart that he doesn't really comprehend social graces, which leads to his death. But that's enough. That's the continuation of the story. But anyway, the Romans are coming to Syracuse, and the Romans are experts at siege warfare. They have huge boats, because Syracuse is a harbor. They have huge boats with siege towers on them, with big grappling hooks that can grapple against the walls and pull the boats to the walls, and the men can climb up the siege towers. There are boats that are 2 or 3 hulls lashed together with huge ladders that will go down on pulleys, almost like the orc siege ladders in that movie with the orcs and the Lord of the Rings at Helm's Deep. And the 2 towers, kind of like that, but more sophisticated, where they can get ladders up against the walls, and they don't have to expose their men very much. And according to legend, and according to the Roman historians, Archimedes comes up with several different clever ways to repel the Romans from the walls, especially from the harbor. Namely that the one that's really famous, that was on Mythbusters here in the U.S., one of the earlier myths, was that Archimedes fashioned a whole bunch of mirrors that would focus the power of the sun and set the sails of the Roman ships on fire. And a lot of people laughed at this. And then Mythbusters, and then subsequently, I think a Harvard professor or one of the Ivy League guys tried it out and succeeded with bronze mirrors, because that's what they wouldn't have the nice silvered mirrors of modern day, and managed to to ignite, I think, not only sails but wood of the ships. It's been a while since I watched that Mythbusters episode. And that would be intimidating now, much less at a time where people didn't know what in the heck was going on. The average Roman soldier who was, an average Roman in the Republic days of the 214. He was just a citizen soldier who provided his own armor and his own kit. But the one that impresses me even more than that is the Claw of Archimedes, which was a giant crane that was on the wall of Syracuse over the harbor. And as the Roman ships would get close, this crane they would rotate the crane out and then drop this huge iron, like, I don't know, it's like a grappling hook or like just a giant hook, and it would puncture the deck of the Roman ship and go through. And then they would crank the crane, and it would come up and it would pick up the wood, and it would pick the ship up out of the water, 20, 30, 40 feet up in the air until the deck planking gave way. And then the ship would fall and strike the water from like a 2-story drop, which no ship nowadays is really built for that, except for, like the really cool Coast Guard ones. And back in those days, the nice big wooden triremes held together with iron nails. That didn't work out so well. And so these ships would be picked up and break, and usually anybody on the ship that was not that was in armor would drown, because you got an extra 40 pounds, 50 pounds of bronze or steel or iron on you. I think in the 214 you would just as often see bronze chess pieces as you would linked mail. But anyway, you're not going to swim in 100, 200, 300 feet of water with that on your back. And so these men would die. And eventually, the Romans, through some, they capture the outer city because the Syracusans are so confident in their defenses that they go ahead and have a festival inside the city. They have a nice big party. And while they're doing this, the Romans, a little scout party of maybe 20, 30 guys, get over the walls, open the gates, reinforce themselves, and they capture the outer city, basically. And most of the Syracusans rush into the citadel. That's the center part of the city that is much better protected, and hide out there. And the Romans, again, lay siege to that. And 8 months, it's already been months and months and months of siege just for the outer city. They lay siege 8 months, for 8 months unto the 8 months, say 8 months again, Daniel. They lay siege to the inner city, and the people inside are starting to starve. They're starting to get hungry, and the Romans get contacted by guys that are interior of the city of the Syracuse, their citadel, the Syracusan citadel. And there's a guy who says, "Hey, I'll let you guys in as long as you don't kill me and my family." And the Romans are like, "Okay, cool, bro, that's fine." And they lay out their plans. The Romans launch a diversionary attack on one side of the citadel, and this guy opens the gates and lets the Romans in. And the Roman general posts guards on his house and the houses of people that he designated, and then he turns his soldiers loose, and they loot, burn, and pillage the city of Syracuse, venting out over a year's worth of anger and frustration. And either kill or enslave everyone in the entire city. Some 10,000 people die by the sword at that point, that day. And which was, it's standard practice back in the old days, actually all the way up until the Renaissance, to pillage a city like that had held out under siege. But Archimedes dies in the pillaging. I think he dies when they take the outer city, because he was continuing his research. He did all the war weapons just kind of as a favor to the king, and because the king paid his bills and let him live there. And but but was not really interested in them. And that's not really what he wanted to do with his life. And he was puzzling out something about circles, is all they can figure out when he died. Because a run-of-the-mill Roman soldier comes into his house, and Archimedes is sitting out in the courtyard, and he is drawing circles in the sand and contemplating them. And the Roman soldier's like, "You're coming with me." And Archimedes gruffly dismisses him and says, "No, please just do not disturb my circles and leave." And the soldier kills him, because nobody talked to me like that. And stabs him, and he dies, despite the fact that the Roman general gave specific orders to capture Archimedes alive, because he realized either what an asset he was, or he wanted him for his triumphal parade through the city of Rome once he had won. But Syracuse falls. They burn and pillage it. They sell everybody into slavery or kill them. And then, in true Roman fashion, they rebuild the city, and it becomes a very important piece of the neighborhood, basically, for centuries, up until well into 500 AD, or AD 500, I think is how you're supposed to actually say that. But yeah, that was the siege of Syracuse. And what I find interesting, the sacking and the burning of the city. There's women and children in the city, and if they were young enough boy children, they were sold into slavery. And if they were too old, they were killed because they were men and of military age. That was the standard practice of not only Romans, but others. But again, that lasted until 15 to 1600s, during the early modern period, about the time of the Musketeers, when there would be a protracted siege of a city. In Europe, they would break the city walls, and then they would give the people inside, once the breach was established, they would give the people inside a certain amount of time, either a day or a few hours, and they would send parley under white flags or whatever, and says, "All right, we've broken your city walls, you can give up now, or when we come in, we're going to kill everybody." And most people took the option to not get killed, because once the walls are broken, it becomes very difficult to keep the enemy out, and the enemy is usually pretty pissed off that they have been gunned or stabbed or arrowed or rocked, hot oiled for the past several months, trying to get into your city. I mean, granted, they're the ones trying to get in, so you gotta take what you get. But again, they're the ones with the big swords, so you kind of have to do what they want. But again, I hope that increases your knowledge on ancient Rome, and shows kind of why I'm so fascinated by that topic. Ever and ever, the school teacher that I once was. And if I ever put down my game controller and actually finish writing the book I've been working on for years, it'll have lots of Roman influences in it. Kind of like the old Patrick O'Brien Master and Commander book series. Not that historically accurate, mind you. Mine's going to have dragons and fun stuff like that. But anyway, I think that's enough. This is now a 25-minute video. Wow. So I'm going to have to close out. It's going to take most of the rest of the day to upload this video. So, alright guys, I will see you on the flip side, and hope you're having a good Friday the 13th.